In this tutorial, we'll be painting up a piece of pre-made terrain, and I'll show you various techniques that you can practice without having to worry about being too neat. I'll show you how to paint concrete, worn golds, rusted metal, and a little bit of verdigris as well on bits of copper and brass, you know, the little green stuff you get. For me, painting terrain is partly a downtime project and partly a way for me to practice new techniques that I can use on other miniatures. One painting technique that comes in very handy when doing terrain is dry brushing, and that's a technique you can use on pretty much any model. Dry brushing is a really quick way to make things look really rough and realistic, and is a good way to achieve a bit of the grimdark kind of style. In a later video, I'll show you how to make your own terrain from pieces of scrap, but for now we're going to be using one of the Games Workshop pre-made bits of terrain. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon if you like our content. Be a bit more careful when you're cutting out these terrain model kits because they're a bit chunkier than your standard model kits. You have to use a bit more force, and you know, bits can fly across the room, hit you in the eye, all that kind of stuff. So cut it out, remove as many mold lines as you want, and glue it together. For the priming, I'm using a dark grey, which is pretty much the same colour as the plastic itself, so it might look a bit pointless, but this gives us a nice texture to paint on. Usually you'd do your undercoat and another layer of paint if you're painting a decent model, but this is just terrain, so we can be a bit rough and ready with it. Now, dry brushing is a very useful technique, and it involves using a dry brush, believe it or not. And you can use any acrylic paint to do this. You don't have to have the special dry paints from Citadel. They're actually a bit crap, those ones, so I don't even buy them. This is just a combination of two different greys, a medium and a light. And what you do is you load your brush up and use a piece of paper towel to just work that paint into the bristles until a lot of the paint is removed from the brush. And the good way to test this is on the back of your hand, so if you see a little impression coming up, that's usually good for painting. On the flat parts of the wall, I'm going to just roughly stipple it into the concrete work to try and give it a nice rough texture, but also trying to catch the edges of the little cracks that appear on the model. On these pillared sections, I'm going to be going backwards and forwards, just trying to catch the edge and not try and get too deep into that little recess in there. Now, this is a building in the middle of a war zone, so you can't expect it to be very clean, so what we're trying to do is make it look dirty. Now that's all coated, we're going to move on to a lighter grey, which is a Celestia grey in this case. And we're going to do the same thing, get some paint on the brush, work it into the bristles, test it on the back of your hand as well. And with this much more contrasting colour, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative with where I put it. And you might find yourself running out of paint pretty quickly with this dry brushing, but there is usually some paint on there. If you're just a bit patient with it and keep working it in there, you'll see the paint coming through. Now, I think this already looks pretty awesome. A nice simple plascrete texture. And now we're going to wash it all over with a brown wash. This one is Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to use a large shade brush for this one. And I'm not going to just slop it over, I'm going to kind of stipple this in and try and work it into those little cracks and all the little rivets and vents and whatnot that appear on this model. And ignore that bit of miscellaneous pink fluff. And that's the concrete done. I'd be happy to leave this as it is, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to keep going. This little number is a pigment from MIG. This is the rubble pigment. I'm going to put this on the bottoms to try and make it look a little bit dirtier. Which is fine, as I said, that was already a pretty nice looking concrete. But this, I'm just going to dab a little bit on the brush and try and work it in while this wash is still wet, so it's got something to stick to. There's lots of different ways to use pigments, and they can actually be a really cool tool. Some of the reds you can get from red pigments you get them much brighter than you can with an acrylic paint, let's put it that way. But it does require a bit of practice and trial and error and just general knowledge about how these things work. It's a lot of faffing basically, so if you just want to paint stuff, you don't need to worry about it too much. But this is just to show you what it looks like. And that's how it looks with just a tiny amount on just a few of the high areas, but mostly on the bottom there. I was going to try and work that in a little bit more so it blends a bit better.
And because I like the look of that so much, I'm actually going to do the other side, but I'm going to go twice as heavy. I'm going to really slop it on, especially onto this fan area, just to see what it looks like. So it looks pretty messy, but I think this will work in our favour a bit later when we come to do the corrosion effects. Now for the golds, I'm going to use my absolute favourite brush, the Army Painter Monster Brush. Now I bring this out whenever I've got something that's bigger than, say, a Space Marine. And this is infinitely more useful than the Citadel large base brush, which I don't really get on with. I don't really get the shape. Don't see why they didn't just do a point like the rest of their brushes, but yeah, you can always get this Army Painter brush if you don't like the Games Workshop ones. And we're going to be using Retributor armor for this gold. And we'll probably get away with just one coat, just because it's going to look rough and dirty anyway. But now is the time we can start being a little bit more careful so we don't get gold on the concrete. Now all the kickboards and window frames are done, I'm going to move on to the silver parts of the model. And for this, I'm going to use my trusty gunmetal from Vallejo Metal Color. And I'm going to coat this all over all of the fans, plumbing, all the sort of industrially looking parts, whichever parts you want silver really, but yeah, basically anything that looks like it should be silver, paint it silver. And just a word of advice, always put your cup of tea on the opposite side where you have your paint water, for obvious reasons. And still being as careful as you can around these parts. Some of the little bits on this model are a little bit tricky, like these cable conduits are pretty tricky. These little fans on the end, you can slip off and get on the concrete, but just try and avoid it if you can. Now I'm going to wash each side of this differently. So with this first side, I'm going to use the Reikland Flesh shade, which is the more reddy brown, which will give us a warm gold. And on the other side is Agrax Earthshade, which is a dark brown wash, and this will give us a dirtier, more grimy, industrial kind of looking gold, which I guess is what we want, but I want to show you what the two different colours look like. And now we're going back to the dry brush now, and for this I'm going to be using Liberator Gold. You can pretty much use any gold that's lighter in shade to do this. I do have the Golden Griffin Citadel dry paint, but it seems to have dried up on me, so I'm just going to use this instead. And this is the warm side, and we're just going to do backwards and forward strokes over all the rivets and corners and whatnot. This will just give it a bit of extra tone and a bit more character. And also with the dry brushing, you can make it look a bit scratchy too, which is kind of cool for what we're looking for. And this is the other side that we did with the Agrax Earthshade. As you can see, it looks a bit dirtier. And with the dry brushing as well, it's good to have a bit of variation in the pressure that you're applying, so it's not the same all the way across the model. It sort of help your model look a little bit more interesting. I think this is looking pretty cool already, but we're going to do the fun part now, which is putting all the corrosion effects on. This paint's called Typhus Corrosion, and it's a Citadel effect paint, but you can actually make your own by just mixing acrylic paint and like bricky sand or any sort of fine grit that you can get your hands on, mix it with some paint and water, and you've got your own effect paint. Easy peasy. Generally, you can be pretty liberal with this paint and just kind of slop it onto any large areas like these fan blades, for example. But when it comes to doing things like pipes and plumbing, just try and think about where it would rust in real life. So around these bits of pipe, I'm assuming that the water is going to come out first where the joints are, and then where the ends are broken, and basically any seals, anything that's not a solid piece of pipe would likely have a bit of rust around it. And also, if you drag your brush downwards, this will make it look like the water's been running down the wall as well. And just to finish off the rust, we're going to use a really bright orange and really lightly dry brush this onto just selective parts of the model. Basically all the parts where you put the texture paint in the previous step. And this texture paint is really going to help the dry brushing because it's going to be a slightly raised area which is going to catch the pigment as it brushes past it. And as you can see, it's just a small amount is enough to make it effective. And just little things like this just make your models have so much more character. And I'm just going to do the same again on other metallic parts. And as a bonus effect, we're going to use this Nailac oxide, which is basically an oxidization effect. I should note I'm also using my old brushes when I'm using these technical paints, because they do have a lot of extra stuff in them that you don't find in normal paint. And be very selective with this paint as well, because really it should only appear on brass, bronze or copper. This effect is also called a patina or verdigris as well, if you're trying to look for other tutorials on how to do this oxidization effect. And there we have it. That's a nice easy terrain tutorial. If there's anything else you want me to try, feel free to mention it in the comments. You can take these techniques and use them on any other models you want to. Some of these will be really useful if you're doing a Death Guard army.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed our video, please leave us a like, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe, and also don't forget to click the little bell icon to get notifications for when new videos are released.